She raised her glass and smiled at me like I was already dead. That's the image I keep coming back to. Not the photographs, not the legal documents, not even the moment my son's face broke open like something cracked from the inside. Just her smile, wine loose and deliberate, aimed at me across a table I had paid for, in a restaurant I had reserved, at a dinner I had spent 3 weeks planning. And the thought that ran through my mind in that exact second wasn't rage. It wasn't even hurt. It was clarity. I want you to stay with me through this story because I promise you, you will not see the ending coming. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this reaches. My name is Raymond Colton. I turned 70 years old on a Thursday evening in Houston, Texas, and I had been carrying a sealed envelope in my jacket pocket for 22 days. I knew what was in it. I knew what it would do. I had rehearsed this moment the way a surgeon rehearses an operation quietly, precisely, with no room for hesitation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the real beginning, because that starts with my wife Carol, and I'm not ready for that yet. Let me start with the dinner. The private dining room at the Aldrich Club had been Carol's favorite. Dark oak paneling, ivory tapers burning low on every table, the kind of quiet that money buys and grief remembers. I had called ahead to make sure they used white gardenias as the centerpiece, Carol's flower, not mine. A small thing. But small things are how you keep someone alive after they're gone. My son Thomas had arrived first, which surprised me. He's always been a man who runs 15 minutes late to everything, a habit that used to drive Carol absolutely crazy and now just made me miss her. He was at the bar when I walked in, straightening his cufflinks, checking the door every 30 seconds. At 44, he still had that restless energy I remembered from his childhood, the boy who couldn't sit still during church, who tapped his foot through every school recital, who fidgeted under pressure like a car engine running too hot. He looked relieved to see me. That should have told me something. His wife, Diane, arrived 8 minutes later. She swept into the room in a way that announced itself, the kind of entrance that assumes everyone is already watching. Her dress was the deep burgundy of expensive things. Her hair arranged with the precision of someone who had spent 2 hours making it look effortless. She kissed my cheek and called me Daddy Ray in the voice she used when she wanted something, and I noticed, not for the first time, that her glass of champagne was already half empty before she had even sat down. I had spent months telling myself Diane wasn't malicious, just difficult. Just the kind of woman who filled silences with shrapnel because she'd never learned how to simply be still. Carol used to say that people who need to wound others are usually running from something. I had tried to extend Diane that grace. I had tried for 8 years, but grace has limits. And Diane had found every single one of mine. The evenings started the way these evenings always do, pleasantly enough. The way weather can be calm in the hour before a storm. We ordered appetizers. Thomas told me about a deal he was working on, the kind of story he tells when he's nervous, filling space with business talk, because real conversation has become foreign to him. I watched Diane drain her second glass and catch the eye of the waiter before the first bottle had been finished, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Not dread exactly, anticipation. I had been building toward tonight for a long time. Honestly, sitting there, looking at the man my son had become careful and diminished, like a room where someone had removed all the furniture, I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, grief. Because the Thomas who sat across from me at that table was not the Thomas I had raised. The Thomas I had raised was curious, funny, ferociously loyal, the boy who once stood up to a bully twice his size in the 6th grade because the bully was bothering a kid with a hearing aid. That Thomas had been there as recently as 6 years ago, before the marriage, before the slow erosion that I had watched happen and not known how to stop. Carol would have known how to stop it. She always understood Thomas in ways I didn't, the particular frequency of his insecurities, the specific way he needed to be loved. But Carol had been gone for 6 years, taken by a cancer that moved faster than any of us could outrun. And in the years since, I had watched my son disappear into a marriage that suited his wife far better than it suited him. I should have seen it earlier. The warning signs were not subtle once I knew what I was looking for. It started as whisper campaigns, small observations Diane would make to Thomas, just loud enough for me to hear. Your father seems exhausted lately. Does he really need to be taking on new clients at his age? I worry about his memory, sweetheart, I really do. Surgical, careful, patient. She was planting seeds of doubt with the precision of someone who had studied exactly which soil they would grow in. And Thomas, God help him, was perfect ground. I want to stop here for a second, because if you have ever watched someone you love being slowly turned against you, not through anything dramatic, not through a single blow, But through years of small redirections, quiet revisions of who you are, then you know something that is very hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. It doesn't feel like war. It feels like weather. You keep waiting for the sky to clear. You keep telling yourself that surely, the person you raise will see through it eventually. And the waiting becomes its own kind of wound. The worst moment before tonight had been Christmas 2 years ago. I had cooked Carol's recipes all day, her pecan glazed ham, the sweet potato souffle that Thomas had requested every December since he was 7 years old, her cornbread dressing that took 3 hours and was worth every minute. I had set the table the way she used to, pressed cloth napkins folded into flowers, the good china, candles in the silver holders she had inherited from her grandmother. And when Thomas and Diane arrived, Diane looked around the dining room and said, with a smile, "Oh, Raymond, this is so much effort for 3 people. We really should just do restaurants from now on. Save you all this trouble." Thomas nodded. He said, "Yeah, Dad, you don't have to go through all this." I said, quietly, that I enjoyed it. That your mother used to, and Diane said, without looking up from her phone, "Carol's been gone a long time, Raymond. It might be healthy to move on." She didn't even say it cruelly. That was what made it devastating. She said it like a diagnosis, like she was being helpful. Thomas said nothing. That night I sat in Carol's kitchen for a long time after they left. I washed the dishes by hand the way she always had, and I thought about what it means to lose someone in stages. First to death, and then to the slow rewriting of their memory by someone who never loved them. I thought about what it means to be made a stranger in your own story. And then I thought, enough. It took 3 months of careful work. I hired an investigator named Frank Osei, a former federal agent who had transitioned to private work, recommended by my attorney. I told him I needed to know the truth about my daughter-in-law's finances and activities, and I told him I needed documentation that would survive a courtroom. Frank was methodical and thorough and said very little, which I respected. Over 90 days, he built a picture that was more damning than anything I had imagined. I won't tell you what I discovered just yet. That comes later. For now, all you need to know is that I arrived at the Aldridge Club on my 70th birthday with a manila envelope in my jacket pocket, and I was perfectly calm. The moment arrived halfway through the main course. Thomas had been refilling Diane's glass all evening, a nervous habit, trying to keep her contained. It wasn't working. She had that particular brightness in her eyes, not happiness, but the kind of loose electricity that comes when someone has had just enough alcohol to believe they are invincible. She stood up, and the way she stood up told me everything I needed to know about how the next 60 seconds were going to go. "Before Raymond makes his little speech," she said, raising her glass with the confidence of someone who has never faced real consequences, "I want to say something." Thomas tensed. "Diane." No, this is important." She smiled at me, the smile. "Happy birthday, Daddy Ray, 70 years old. You know, I've always wondered what kind of man makes a woman like Carol want to leave." She laughed lightly, like it was nothing. "Tonight, I think I finally understand." The room went very quiet. "I need you to understand something. Carol did not leave me. Carol died in a hospital room in the medical center with my hand in hers and Thomas on her other side. And she was surrounded by people who loved her. And she fought until she couldn't fight anymore. Diane had been at the funeral. Diane had watched me shatter at the graveside. Diane had eaten the food that our neighbors brought to the house in the days after, and had thanked them graciously and had sat in Carol's living room and cried convincing tears. She knew exactly what she was doing. I set my fork down. "Are you finished?" I asked her. My voice came out steadier than I expected, quieter than the room. She waved a hand. "Oh, Raymond, don't be so sensitive. It was a joke." I looked at Thomas. He was staring at his plate. And in that moment, not in rage, not in grief, but with the absolute crystalline clarity I have only experienced a handful of times in my life, I reached into my jacket and placed the envelope on the table. The paper made almost no sound when it landed, but something in the way I placed it, deliberate, unhurried, made Diane stop smiling. "Open it," I said to Thomas. He looked up at me for the first time all evening. His eyes were confused, a little frightened. He reached for the envelope with hands that were not entirely steady, and I watched Diane's face the way you watch a fire for the moment when it stops being controlled. I honestly don't know if I could have sat as still as I did in that moment. I've replayed it many times since, and I still marvel at the quiet inside me. Something in the months of preparation had burned away whatever was left of my grief, and left something cleaner behind. Thomas broke the seal. The first photograph landed face up on the white tablecloth between the gardenias and the candlelight. A parking garage downtown. A woman in a red dress that I recognized. A man I did not, younger, tall, his hand low on her back in the particular way of people who are not concerned about being seen. The timestamp read a Tuesday afternoon in April. Diane had told Thomas she was at a gallery opening that day. Thomas went very still. He flipped to the second photograph. Same man. Different location, the lobby of the Houstonian Hotel. He flipped to a third, a fourth, a fifth. I watched his face move through confusion into comprehension, into something that had no name. His breathing became shallow. His hand on the photographs was completely motionless, the way hands go motionless when the mind needs every available resource just to process. She said very quietly, "Those could be manipulated." Thomas looked up at her, and in his face I saw something I hadn't seen in 8 years. Not the performance of confidence that Diane had coached him into. Not the careful blankness he had adopted to survive his marriage. Something real, something raw, something that looked, for the first time in a very long time, like the boy I had raised. "Keep going," I said. "There's more." I want to pause here, because this is the moment where I need to tell you something. I am not a man who enjoys revenge. I want to be honest with you. Sitting across the table from my son as he dismantled 8 years of his life in real time, I did not feel triumph. I felt something much more complicated. I felt the particular sorrow of a father who spent years watching his child suffer a wound he couldn't treat, and now, finally, was handing him the medicine knowing the medicine itself was going to hurt. Beneath the photographs was a financial summary, 41 pages, prepared by a forensic accountant with impeccable credentials. Thomas scanned the first page, and I watched the color leave his face. The man in the photographs was named Derek Solis. 31 years old, worked in commercial real estate, drove a silver Mercedes that had been purchased in cash 18 months ago. The cash had originated in an account held in Thomas's name, an account that Thomas had never opened, never signed for, never seen. Diane had opened it using a forged signature. She had deposited into it over 19 months, a total of $114,000, transferred from Colton Industries, the company I had built over 35 years, from a single commercial leasing contract into a mid-sized empire with 93 employees. She had used Thomas's professional credentials to authorize the transfers. Expense reports, vendor invoices, consulting fees paid to Derek Solis, who, when contacted by Frank Osei, confirmed he had no idea what Colton Industries actually did and believed the money was coming from Diane personally. Thomas said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, flat, drained of everything except the fundamental need to understand. "You forged my name." Diane said nothing. "You stole from my father's company. You used my name to do it, and you gave the money to him." He set the photographs down. He did not throw them. He set them down very carefully, the way you handle something that might break you if you let it. "How long?" She tried to find a version of the truth that could survive the room. She couldn't. 2 years, she said finally. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the restaurant had gone completely still. I could hear the candles. I could hear someone at a distant table drawing breath. "Our entire marriage," he said. "You have been." He stopped. Started again. "I told you about my father. I told you how much I wanted to run this company. I told you what it meant to me." His voice broke slightly on that word "meant" and then steadied. "And you used that. You used everything I told you and you turned it into this." That was the moment. Not the photographs, not the financial summary, that sentence. Because in that sentence, I heard my son locate himself again, recognize the shape of what had been done to him, name it, stand inside the naming of it. I had not seen him do that in 8 years, but I was not finished. I pulled a final folder from my jacket, thinner than the others, just 6 pages. I had debated whether to use this material. What it contained went beyond civil consequence into territory that, once spoken aloud in a room, cannot be unspoken. "Thomas," I said, "there's a transcript you need to read." Diane's face changed. For the first time all evening, the performance dropped entirely. What was underneath was not tears, not anger. It was calculation, pure, cold, and suddenly very visible. Frank Osei had followed Derek Solis as well as Diane. On a Wednesday morning in September, he had placed a listening device legally, with single-party consent, in a coffee shop in Midtown, where Diane and Derek met regularly. The transcript of that conversation ran 4 pages. "Page 2, I said quietly. "Second paragraph." Thomas found it. He read it. His face went to a place I could not follow. He looked up at his wife. "You said you told him he couldn't finish." "I finished for him." She told him that the timeline depended on natural events. That a man my age, under sustained stress, with a history of cardiac risk in the family, could be expected to present an opportunity within 18 months. She said that once I was gone, moving the company into her control through your authority would be straightforward. Because, as she put it, Thomas does what I tell him to do. The silence lasted a very long time. If you are watching this and you have ever doubted yourself because someone you trusted kept telling you that you were wrong, that you were weak, that you were too sensitive, too old, too slow, too much, I want you to hear what I heard in my son's silence after he read those words. I want you to understand that the moment a person finally sees clearly, after years of fog, is not a triumphant moment. It is a devastating one. Because clarity means accounting for all the time the fog cost you. And that accounting is brutal. Diane made one last attempt. She said I had violated her privacy. She said recordings were inadmissible. She said I was a controlling old man who had manufactured this entire evening to destroy her marriage because I had never accepted her. Thomas stood up. He was steadier than I expected. Derek Solis has already spoken to the FBI, I said, before she could continue. He provided a full statement in exchange for immunity. The forensic accountant's report has been submitted to federal investigators. Your accounts have been frozen. Your attorney at Blackwell Family Law, the one you retained in February, on Valentine's Day, while Thomas was making dinner reservations for the two of you, has been contacted and has agreed to cooperate. Diane looked at me for a long time. You were never losing your mind, she said, almost quietly, almost to herself. Were you? No, I said. I wasn't. She was escorted out of the Aldridge Club that evening by two men I had asked to wait in the lobby. Thomas sat at the table for a long time after she left, looking at the photographs, looking at the gardenia centerpiece, looking at his hands. I stayed with him. Eventually, he said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I told him the truth. Because you wouldn't have believed me, and I needed you to see it yourself. He nodded. He didn't argue. That, too, was new. 6 months later, Houston is gold in the early morning, the light coming off the glass towers downtown, at a particular angle that Carol always said looked like something out of a painting. I'm in my office before 7, which is where I have always been, which is where I will probably always be, which no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like what it always was. Love for work I chose, life I built, hours I gave freely. Thomas knocks before entering now. He didn't used to. He comes in with 2 coffees, the way he used to when he was a young associate learning the business at my elbow, before the years took that ease from between us. He sits across from me. We talk about clients, about strategy, about a new contract that came through with a company in the energy corridor. We talk about small things. A restaurant he tried, a book I recommended, normal things. The kinds of things fathers and sons say to each other when there is nothing left to prove. Diane received 4 years in a federal corrections facility for wire fraud, identity theft, and financial conspiracy. The attempted conspiracy charges were reduced in exchange for her cooperation in a broader investigation. She is not someone I think about very often anymore. I used to think about her constantly in the way you think about something that is trying to kill you. Now she occupies the same small space in my mind that regret does, present but not controlling. Thomas told me recently that he was not ready to take over the company. He said he needed 2 years to rebuild what had been damaged, his judgment, his relationships with our clients, his understanding of his own decision-making. He said he wanted to earn the succession rather than simply receive it. That one sentence was worth every sleepless night, every file Frank Osei brought me, every moment I sat at Carol's kitchen table and wondered whether my son would ever find his way back. I told Thomas what this whole experience taught me. Not about Diane, she was a lesson, but not the lesson. The lesson was this: the people who love you should make you more yourself, not less. Every relationship, every marriage, every partnership, every friendship, the test is not whether it's comfortable. The test is whether you are growing into someone you recognize or shrinking into someone who has forgotten their own name. I want you to sit with that question today. Just one. Ask yourself, is there a relationship in your life that is asking you to be smaller than you are? You don't have to answer out loud, but answer honestly. One last thing. My investigators found, among Diane's papers, a birthday card she had apparently intended to give me written 3 years ago, before the plan had fully taken shape. It was warm, affectionate, full of the performance of a daughter-in-law who loved her family. She must have decided not to send it. I don't know why I'm telling you that, except that it reminded me of something Carol once said, that cruelty is almost never the whole truth about a person. That the saddest stories are about people who could have chosen differently and didn't. I don't forgive Diane, but I understand now that she was a woman who believed the only way to have security was to take it from someone else. She was wrong, but she was not born that way. That morning, as I was looking out at Houston waking up below me, Thomas put a hand on my shoulder and said, "She was wrong about one thing for sure, Dad." I asked him what. He said, "Mom didn't leave you. She's everywhere in here." He meant the office, the way I had kept Carol's photograph on the credenza, the gardenia plant on the windowsill, the handwritten note she had left me once framed, small, on the wall beside the door that read simply, "Keep going." I don't cry often. I'm a 70-year-old man who has buried a wife and rebuilt a family and survived an attempted theft of everything he ever worked for. But I cried then, just quietly, just for a moment. Keep going. Now I want to hear from you. Comment 1 if you think I was right to wait and gather evidence before confronting Diane. Comment 2 if you think I should have acted sooner and spared my son years of manipulation. Comment 3 if you believe Thomas bears some responsibility for what happened, and I won't argue with you if you do, because I've asked myself that question too. Tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you have ever been made to feel invisible by someone who was supposed to be your family, I would be honored to hear your story in the comments. If this story reached you, if it said something true about loyalty or legacy or the long work of loving someone back to themselves, please subscribe. There are more stories coming, and they are all worth staying for. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.